In the 1950s, the Soviet Union was racing to build credible ways to hit the United States. Andrei Sakharov, yes, the physicist who later won the Nobel Peace Prize, helped conceive a weapon called the T-15, a gigantic nuclear torpedo carried by a submarine meant to detonate in or near a harbor. The logic was blunt. Ports are economic choke points. Destroy New York, Norfolk, or San Diego, and you don't just wreck a pier, you rupture the bloodstream of a nation's logistics. On paper, T felt like a shortcut to parity. In practice, it collided with physics and steel. The torpedo would have consumed so much space that a submarine could carry essentially one shot. The size limited maneuverability, handling, and reliability. Meanwhile, submarine-launched ballistic missiles were improving fast. SLBMs offered standoff range, quicker time to target, and a more survivable second strike posture. Naval planners looked at the trade, a single ungainly harbor buster versus multiple missiles from a patrol box. The T-15 lost. But the idea didn't vanish. It mutated into strategy. The Soviets developed a mindset of assured retaliation even if command collapsed, what the West later called perimeter or dead hand. The goal was psychological as much as physical. Convince adversaries that any decapitation attempt would still trigger catastrophic response. That required survivability, redundancy, and automation. You see the seeds of Poseidon here, not as a first-strike marvel, but as a weapon designed to survive chaos and still matter. Soviet vulnerability fed the mindset. Much of the USSR's population and industry sat near navigable waterways, and its sea access depended on choke points NATO could threaten. In a shooting war, ports, naval bases, and coastal infrastructure would be prime targets. The Soviets internalized a port-centric targeting logic because ports concentrate high-value assets, fuel farms, container yards, repair docks, railheads, and command nodes within blast distance. Break those, and you don't just kill ships, you halt mobilization. There was also a civil defense reality. Early Cold War shelters didn't scale for sustained port operations under nuclear attack. You could harden silos and bunkers, but you couldn't harden a harbor. A nuclear emplacement in a harbor isn't just about blast. The contamination and debris turn the environment into a long-term operational hazard. Again, you can hear the future Poseidon argument forming. Durable disruption beats instant destruction when the goal is to paralyze capacity. As SLBMs matured, T-15's appeal faded. Submarines like the Hotel and later the Delta and Typhoon classes turned into real second strike platforms. The Soviet Navy invested in ballistic and cruise missiles, layered defenses, and quieting tech. The Doomsday torpedo receded into the background, a relic of a time before missiles became reliable and precise. Then the Soviet Union collapsed. Budgets cratered, fleets rusted at piers, and trained crews left. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Russia's navy declined across the board. Nuclear submarines sat half-maintained, new construction slowed to a crawl. At the same time, the United States poured resources into missile defense research and deployed Aegis systems across a growing fleet. Whether or not those defenses could stop a full-scale Russian strike was less important than the perception they could erode Russia's deterrent edge. That perception matters. Deterrence is a mind game anchored to capabilities. If your adversary believes their first salvo might be blunted, and your own aging SSBN force might be tracked or attrited early, pressure builds to field something that can bypass those defenses entirely. Here, the old Soviet logic, assured retaliation under chaos, meets a new asymmetric instinct. Go underwater, go slow, go survivable, and target what can't be shielded. Ports and coastal infrastructure don't come with ABM umbrellas. A device that can loiter quietly and strike weeks later doesn't need a launch alert. It just needs to show it can get there. There's also the theater-level effect. A weapon that threatens coastlines forces an adversary to protect thousands of miles of shore, not a handful of missile fields. That's an expensive, sensor-heavy, politically complicated problem. Even if you never fire, you're taxing the other side's budget and attention. Again, that's very Soviet. impose cost, create dilemmas, and lean on fear. Psychologically, a weapon like Poseidon tallies with the perimeter mindset. You don't need flawless command links if the platform can execute pre-programmed logic. You don't need a city-busting airburst if you can make a port unusable for months. And you don't need extreme accuracy if your target is a harbor basin where the water amplifies the mess. The threat is credible because it exploits geography and infrastructure rather than exquisite timing. So why didn't the Soviets just keep T-15? Because their missiles got good. Why revisit the idea now? Because Russia's missiles are still lethal, but the context shifted. Constrained forces, perceived missile defenses, and a desire to stress NATO in an arena where the West must spend heavily to keep up. Poseidon fits that gap. It's a hedge against disarmament fantasies, a leverage tool in crises, and a reminder that the ocean is the biggest maneuver space on Earth. Everything changes when a navy believes a single autonomous system could force insurers to freeze trade and ports to go dark. That's the real echo of Soviet doomsday thinking, deterrence by making the cost of miscalculation obvious and unbearable. And it's why the next chapter starts with a leak everyone was meant to see. From collapse to asymmetry, why Poseidon exists. When the Soviet Union fell apart, the Russian Navy didn't just shrink, it hollowed out. Submarines tied up at piers for years became parts donors. Crews left for civilian work. The shipyards that once pushed out ballistic missile subs turned into repair shops struggling to keep legacy hulls alive. Through the late 1990s and into the 2000s, patrol rates dropped, training cycles stretched, and the Bastion strategy in the Barents and Okhotsk looked more like hope than doctrine. Now put that against what the United States was building. Aegis-equipped destroyers and cruisers spread across the fleet. SM-3 interceptors matured. Ground-based mid-course defenses appeared in Alaska and California. Whether those systems could defeat a concentrated Russian ICBM salvo wasn't the point. They created a narrative. The West was investing in missile defenses, while Russia's sea-based deterrent, older Delta IVs with aging missiles, few new Bore boats entering service, looked thinner. In deterrence, perception shapes decision-making. If leaders worry that a first strike could be blunted, they look for options that bypass the shield entirely. That's where asymmetry comes in. Instead of racing dollar for dollar on missile accuracy and penetration aids, you pivot to a domain the defenses don't cover. Underwater, there's no ABM. There are sonars, patrols, and networks, but they're patchy and political. You can't ring an entire continent with persistent undersea interceptors. You can't build a radar dome over every harbor. If you can field a system that's nuclear-powered, autonomous, and able to loiter at depth, you force your rival to protect thousands of miles of coastline and hundreds of critical nodes. LNG terminals, naval bases, container hubs, fuel depots, and choke point straits. Arms control reinforced the incentive. Treaty ceilings capped deployed strategic warheads and launchers. Russia retained potent ICBMs, but the number of quiet, modern SSBNs lagged. Precision conventional strike from the US, Tomahawk waves, stealth aircraft, and later hypersonic torque fueled a Russian fear of a disarming conventional attack on fixed command and control and submarine bases. If your submarines are at risk in port and your missile fields could be degraded, a survivable, hard-to-find underwater system becomes attractive. It doesn't need a satellite uplink in wartime. It doesn't broadcast a launch plume. It just moves. There's also messaging power. Poseidon says, in plain language, you can't contain this with your current defenses. It threatens what the United States actually lives on: maritime trade. Smash a port, and you don't just break a pier. You jam rail links, delay energy imports, spike insurance rates, and ripple supply chains. Even the rumor of deployment can push insurers to raise premiums or exclude coverage for certain approaches. That's leverage before detonation, which is the sweet spot for coercion. Domestically, the project served multiple masters. Budgets were tight, but prestige programs that promised strategic payoff got oxygen. A nuclear-powered UUV plays to Russia's engineering identity: reactors, titanium hulls, deep-diving special mission subs. It also gives the Navy and strategic forces a banner capability that can be showcased without showing too much. When you can display a large weapon body, a special-purpose carrier like Belgorod, and a tantalizing slide of specifications, you create political capital at home and anxiety abroad. Critically, Poseidon fits into Russia's layered deterrence narrative. At the top sits the assured second strike from ICBMs and SLBMs. Below that, theater nuclear options, dual-capable missiles, and air-delivered weapons. Poseidon adds a survivable, time-flexible threat against coastal infrastructure. It can be prepositioned, routed along odd paths, and held in reserve as a bargaining chip. In a crisis, you don't need to escalate to city-killing strikes. You can threaten to render one harbor unusable for months. That's a more calibrated nuclear message, still horrific, but framed as hitting military economic arteries rather than civilian population centers. This is important because escalation management is the modern game. Russia wants tools that complicate NATO planning without forcing immediate nuclear exchange. A system that can't be intercepted by ABM, that exploits gaps in undersea surveillance, and that targets high-leverage infrastructure checks those boxes. It also puts pressure on allied politics. Governors, mayors, port authorities, and insurers become stakeholders in national security decisions. That widens the pressure arc beyond defense ministries. You can see why this isn't just a science project. It's a strategic hedge against perceived US advantages in missile defense and precision strike. It's a cost-imposing move that drags the West into expensive seabed sensing. And it's a bargaining tool designed to work in the space between conventional war and Armageddon. The ocean is the world's biggest concealment terrain. If you can weaponize patience, slow, deep, quiet, you change your adversary's playbook. And that's the context that makes what happened next feel deliberate, not accidental. Russia needed the world to know a system like this existed without proving every detail. So one afternoon, a camera in a Kremlin meeting caught a slide it shouldn't have, clear, framed, and aimed at analysts everywhere. The televised accident, Poseidon's first reveal. Here's the scene. November 2015, a Kremlin meeting with military brass. Cameras roll for the evening news, and for a few seconds a staffer's binder sits open just right. On the page, a legible diagram labeled Status 6, an unmanned, nuclear-powered undersea system with intercontinental range. The shot lingers long enough for foreign analysts to freeze-frame, translate, and circulate. Accident. The framing, clarity, and timing said otherwise. Why stage it? Because ambiguity is a weapon. Russia wanted the idea planted. There's a system that doesn't care about missile shields and doesn't follow ballistic trajectories. The slide conveniently showed the parts Western audiences couldn't ignore, range measured in thousands of kilometers, operating depths beyond most anti-submarine weapons, and speeds that imply a pump jet or exotic propulsion. It even teased the word cobalt, a nod to salted, warhead lore designed to amplify fear. That single word did more work in headlines than any white paper could. Now, this is important because the details straddled signal and noise. The signal was the concept, a nuclear-powered autonomous torpedo drone with strategic reach. The noise lived in the theatrics, perfectly legible specs that might reflect aspirations, not realities. Range, plausible when you carry a compact reactor. Depth, Russia has decades of deep-diving experience with special mission subs. Speed, high bursts are conceivable, but sustained sprinting would compromise stealth and endurance. Cobalt. It's a psychological accelerant, not a doctrinal necessity. Analysts pulled the slide apart. Intercontinental routing implies months underwater and navigation that doesn't depend on satellites. That fits with Russian investment in inertial systems and seabed mapping. Deep operation suggests a design shaped to survive pressure and stay under most shipping noise. And the warhead callouts pointed to a large diameter hull, bigger than any standard torpedo, so you're not talking about a tactical weapon. You're in strategic payload territory, aimed at ports and coastal nodes. But here's where it gets interesting. By accidentally revealing Status 6, Russia gained two advantages without testing in the open. First, it forced every navy to ask whether their undersea awareness could catch something slow, deep, and autonomous. Second, it It created a bargaining chip. You don't need full operational capability to change calculus. You need plausible capability and a reputation for following through. The slide offered both. Western media latched onto the radioactive tsunami angle. That phrase travels fast. It also muddies the water. The idea of engineered megawaves oversells the physics and undersells the real threat. Long-term port denial from contamination, debris, and economic shock. The Kremlin didn't mind the confusion. Fear is leverage, and messy narratives keep opponents guessing about yield, burst depth, and employment doctrine. Inside Russia, the leaks signaled progress without inviting hard verification. "We have a new category of deterrent," the message read, "and it goes under your radar." It boosted the prestige of special-purpose platforms like Belgorod and the design bureaus behind them. It also bought time. While foreign outlets debated cobalt and cartoonish wave heights, engineers could iterate propulsion, guidance, and launch concepts away from daily scrutiny. Everything changes when you realize the reveal wasn't about specs, it was about audiences. NATO planners got a problem set. Insurers and port authorities got a nightmare. Arms controllers got a classification puzzle. And the public got a simple storyline. There's a Doomsday torpedo out there, and it swims past your defenses. Set aside the theater, though. To judge the threat, you've got to understand the machine itself, what powers it, how it navigates, and what it can realistically do underwater. How Poseidon works, the nuclear-powered torpedo drone. Here's what you need to know. Poseidon isn't a torpedo in the traditional sense. It's a very large, autonomous underwater vehicle designed for strategic effect. Think of a cigar-shaped hull several meters in diameter, long enough to house a compact reactor, shielding, propulsion machinery, guidance systems, and a large nuclear warhead. It isn't meant to chase a frigate. It's meant to navigate oceans, loiter, and arrive at a harbor or coastal approach on its own timeline. Start with propulsion. The core is a compact, fast reactor, likely a liquid metal or pressurized water design, optimized for high power density and long endurance. The reactor's heat drives a steam cycle that spins a turbine coupled to a pump jet. Pump jets are chosen for efficiency and lower cavitation at moderate speeds, trading top-end sprint for quieter cruise. The reactor doesn't need refueling for the mission. The constraint is component reliability and thermal management, not energy. That's why interoceanic range becomes plausible. With careful speed control and power management, it can run for months underwater. Guidance is where the autonomy matters. Poseidon can't rely on GPS once submerged, so it starts with high-grade inertial navigation. Ring laser or fiber optic gyros paired with accelerometers, corrected occasionally by surfacing under cloud cover or referencing celestial fixes via periscope-like masts, if doctrine allows. More realistically, it leans on terrain contour navigation, matching onboard bathymetric maps to real-time sonar returns, comparing seabed features, slopes, and canyons to a stored atlas. Russia has decades of deep ocean mapping from its special mission fleet, and that data feeds autonomy. Add impossible acoustic beacons, seabed transponders placed along routes, to bound drift without broadcasting a detectable signal. The autonomy stack tiers up. Mission-level planning to hit waypoints, mid-level behaviors to dodge obstacles and avoid shipping lanes, and low-level control that manages buoyancy, trim, and energy. Endurance unlocks routing. Poseidon can take polar paths beneath ice, ride thermoclines to mask its noise, or hug complex continental shelves where seabed clutter and biological noise hide it. It can loiter offshore, wait for a trigger condition, then creep inward along dredged channels that lead directly to target basins. This time flexibility is the point. No launch plume, no boost phase detection, just a slow approach that expands the defender's search area to absurd scale. What launches it? Two purpose-built vectors dominate the open record: the converted special mission submarine Belgorod and the follow-on Khabarovsk class. Belgorod is enormous, designed to carry multiple Poseidon bodies in external or semi-external tubes integrated into the hull. Khabarovsk appears to be a more dedicated carrier with internal magazines. There's also chatter about seabed containers, encapsulated launch canisters pre-positioned on the ocean floor. Technically possible, but operationally risky. Maintenance, command assurance, and treaty optics get thorny fast. A submarine launch preserves mobility and political control while keeping maintenance crews nearby. Command and control is deliberately constrained. In peacetime, limited acoustic communications can update mission parameters at low data rates, short messages, authentication codes, and aborts. In crisis or wartime, you can't assume persistent comms. That's why pre-programmed logic dominates. Multiple contingency branches that respond to timeouts, geofence triggers, or loss of contact with a carrier sub. Positive control versus autonomy is the tightrope. You want assurance the weapon won't wander or be spoofed, but you also want it to execute if higher command is disrupted. Expect layered failsafes, arming keys tied to route completion, multi-factor environmental checks, and time-locked sequences that prevent premature activation. Now, noise and hydrodynamics. The hull form must balance internal volume with drag management. A broad, blunt cylinder wastes energy. A carefully faired nose, blended pump jet shroud, and fairings over control surfaces reduce flow separation. Internal isolation mounts and coolant flow smoothing reduce tonal signatures from the reactor and turbines. It still makes noise, everything does, but at the right speed bands and depths, that noise can sit under ambient, distant shipping, wave noise refracted by thermoclines, and biological activity. The reactor allows very slow, very steady cruise, acoustically friendly. Bursts of speed are reserved for terminal runs or evasion, where stealth is already compromised. Sensors are minimalist, but mission-focused. Forward-looking sonars map ahead and downscan for seabed features. Side arrays help maintain lateral separation from slopes and man-made structures. Basic electronic support measures are plausible near the surface for sniffing active sonars or AIS emissions, but emissions control rules keep Poseidon passive. Internally, health monitoring is constant. Reactor temperatures, vibration spectra, bearing wear proxies, and radiation levels. Any out-of-family signature triggers self-preservation behaviors, slowing down, changing depth, or parking in a quiet pocket to cool and reassess. Warhead integration dictates hull diameter. Reports suggest a very large yield package with robust environmental hardening to survive long-duration saltwater immersion and pressure cycles. That means dedicated shock mounting, redundant environmental seals, and periodic housekeeping routines, thermal cycling, moisture scavenging, and diagnostic checks. The interface between the warhead and the autopilot includes arming logic that waits for a narrow envelope of location, depth, and timing, plus authentication pathways that require multiple internal confirmations before the final commit. Deployment concepts vary. One model, a carrier sub releases Poseidon in friendly bastions, then returns to patrol. The UUV proceeds alone. Another, the carrier escorts at distance, providing occasional acoustic updates from safe waters before the drone departs on its final leg. A third, Deterrence signaling, simply puts a carrier to sea with publicly hinted payloads, letting uncertainty drive political effects without any launch. All of this sounds sleek on a slide, but the constraints are real. Saltwater corrosion, biofouling, navigation drift over months, and cumulative mechanical wear are stubborn. That's why engineering choices tilt conservative. Cruise slow, avoid unnecessary maneuvers, and use the ocean's physics as camouflage. The reactor gives endurance, but discipline provides survivability. And once you accept it's a patient machine, not a speedster, the strategy around it starts to make sense.